We're going to do something just a little different with the scripture this morning. This is the story of Jacob and Esau out of Genesis 27. It's a long story. It's a very long story. And so what I'd like to do is condense it within the sermon and share it with you there. My strong urging is find a time this week to read this scripture. It's a beautiful story. It's a rich story. But I would like to give you a smaller, condensed version within the message itself. So the title of my sermon today is Name It to Tame It. And as many of you know, this is the F-O-R-G, fourth of our 7 sermon series on forgiveness. Travis, can you show us our fancy little graphic? We have been talking this fall about forgiveness. First week was F, forgive, not forget. Second, own how you feel. Third, recognize the triggers. This week, grieve the loss and give it time. I, intercessory prayers next week. V, vamoose from it. And last week, empty spaces. Fill them with good things. Today we are talking about grief. My dad had a great saying growing up. It was great and it was kind of tragic too. Anytime he listened to the news or heard a trauma, and back in those days it was like Vietnam, Watergate, inflation, any of that stuff, he would just flick off the TV. Well, no, he would get up and turn it off because there was no remote back then. But he'd turn off the TV, shake his head, and say, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. I don't, to this day, know what a handbasket is. But it's bad, and I know that. And I think if he were around, God bless him, these days, he'd be saying that every 5 minutes. Because things are falling apart, right and left. Big things falling apart, and the little things too. Case in point. This summer, Toby and I were traveling just a little bit, and we stopped for the night at a Holiday Inn Express. Anybody like Holiday Inn Expresses? Well, just wait. So, I always did basic motel. You drive up in the parking lot, get your bags, check in, go to sleep. It's familiar. It's comforting. It's kind of a safe place to stay at the end of the day, get you some sleep. Until this time. I checked in, and the woman at the desk informed me that I owed an extra $5. And I was like, oh, okay, well, for what? Because I prepaid on Expedia, And she says, oh, we charge $5 for parking. At a Holiday Inn Express with the generic little motel parking lot, they're charging for parking. And I said, well, is there valet? And she didn't think that was very funny. And I said, do you detail the car while it's out there? And she informed me that this was standard now with all motels, that everybody charged parking. Well, first off, no. Nobody charges parking for a basic motel. And second, just second. It's just wrong, But we were tired and we didn't feel like dealing with it, so we paid the $5. But boy, it made me mad. And I steamed on that thing for days. And finally, I turned to Toby and I'm like, why am I so mad about this? It's only $5. And he thought for a minute and he said, because I think it hit something bigger. He said, I think this thing hit not anger, but I think it was about a loss. This is about loss of trust. This is about maybe even loss of civility. And I don't know what it was, but the second he said that, my shoulders just dropped. And there was something about words naming my source of anger that felt so right. It was like the rage over the little things now made sense. Now, it's not necessarily, justifying my reaction, but it made it more understandable. There was a deeper grief happening at the Holiday Inn and in the world about the loss of trust and the loss of civility. You know, Toby must have been great friends with the British writer and author and thinker C.S. Lewis, because C.S. Lewis really put it well. And I'm going to show you this wonderful graphic that Travis made. I sat with my anger long enough until she told me her real name was grief. That's a sermon in one line. You know, there's a woman named Gina Moffat who is a grief and trauma therapist here in New York City, and she explained it this way. She said, we don't always recognize it, but sometimes grief arrives as anger. Because it's easier to be mad than to admit we've lost something we can't get back. She went on to say, just start by naming it, because sometimes that's all grief really wants. And that's why I entitled the sermon today, Name It to Tame It. That was a tagline made famous by Dr. Dan Siegel, who is a professor of psychiatry out at UCLA. And he studied the power of naming in the human brain. And he wrote about how strong feelings that we may generate activate the part of the brain that's in charge of emotions. That's called the amygdala. But when we use words to label those emotions, those feelings, like I feel angry, I feel grief, the rational part of the brain takes over. And all of a sudden, the emotions start to ease. To name it is to tame it. And grief is one of those emotions that rarely gets named. Now, a great example is today's Bible story from Genesis 27, the story of Jacob and Esau. Now, I'm going to give you a little summary of this, but please spend some time this week reading Genesis 27. It's a beautiful story with some powerful lessons. So here's the summary that I want you to take away. Esau and Jacob were sons of Isaac and Rebekah, and they were twin brothers. Esau, the firstborn, was described as reddish in color, hairy, a skilled hunter, and was his father Isaac's favorite. Every time I read that, it's reddish in color, hairy, a skilled hunter. I mean, it's like a character out of Duck Dynasty, you know? It's like, that was Esau, his father's favorite. Jacob, the quieter of the two, was his mother Rebekah's favorite. When Isaac grew old and nearly blind, he asked Esau to come to him, so he could offer him a last blessing as his eldest son. But Isaac's wife, Rebekah, overheard that request, and she wanted her favorite to get the blessing. So she helped Jacob disguise himself as Esau. She put him in Esau's clothes. She covered his arms with goat skin so he would be hairy when Isaac reached out to touch him. And so Jacob, dressed in all of this finery, goes to his father in Esau's place and tricks Isaac into giving him the blessing meant for the firstborn son. And this was a serious blessing, a blessing of power and prosperity and promise. When Esau discovered the deceit, he flew into a murderous rage, forcing his brother Jacob to flee for his life. I think we can all understand the rage on Esau's part. I mean, he's dealing with a little more than a $5 parking charge from the Holiday Inn. His birthright had been stolen. But the thing is, the rage he felt, he never broke free from. Yeah, they tried to reconcile, but in the end, there was never any true reconciliation between those brothers. The rage blocked it. And I wonder if it's because that rage was never truly named as grief. Grief from losing his birthright, grief from being unseen and unnamed. I mean, bottom line, I think this story is a cautionary tale of what can happen when grief goes unnamed. Now, you may be thinking, how can a lesson on a red, hairy hunter help me today? Well, let's think about it on a personal level. What things are making you angry in your life right now? Even the tiniest things need to be examined. Let's say you're mad at your spouse or your partner because they're messy. Is it anger, or is what you're feeling grief over a loss of respect? Do you get mad after standing in long lines at CVS? Well, it could be grief over a larger issue of just feeling dismissed in life. Are you angry about not getting the recognition at work you deserved? That anger could be grief about feeling unseen. Anger is a mask, but its real name is grief. Yeah, unnamed grief can be harmful on a personal level, but on a societal level, it can be utterly destructive. In American politics, for example, much of the rage we see is rooted in communities who feel unseen, forgotten by the leaders, unheard in the public square. And that unacknowledged grief can fester into anger, blame, and even violence. Sometimes. But then there are examples of a different way. Consider the lessons from some of the social movements birthed from our unseen, unnamed communities. Movements like Black Lives Matter or Me Too. They teach us that grief denied becomes rage, but grief named becomes power. It becomes a declaration against centuries of erasure. It gives voice to millions whose pain has been ignored. The act of naming is not just personal healing, it's communal liberation. And that's the same reason we put language around major issues of the day, like global warming or gun violence or systemic racism. The language forces these issues into the public square where they can't be ignored. Friends, forgiveness begins with truth-telling. And truth-telling begins with naming. Now, this may all sound overwhelming to think about on a national or global scale. But remember, forgiveness work, grief work starts at the micro level. It starts with each of us doing our own work on our own hearts, ensuring that we don't, as Socrates once said, live an unexamined life. This week, I'm going to give you just a tiny bit of homework. It's easy, won't take long, but I think it could have a powerful impact. You need a piece of paper, a pen, and a bowl of water, and that's it. Now, if you come to me and say you don't have those things in your home, we're going to have a chat. Okay. So what I want you to do is take 10 minutes out of your day, away from other people, away from distractions, and think about where anger is appearing in your life. And then I want you to think about what grief might be hiding underneath that anger. Name the grief on that piece of paper, and then drop that piece of paper into the bowl of water. Watch it dissolve. Experience it dissolving. See it dissolving. Feel it dissolving in here. Friends, the path of forgiveness starts when we can name the grief underneath the anger. Look, I don't know what's going to happen in the future. The world may continue to go to hell in a handbasket, whatever that handbasket is. More big things may fall apart. More little things may fall apart. I mean, hey, we might be heading towards a universal $5 parking fee at every Holiday Inn in the country. But at least I know what I'm feeling about it now. It's unacknowledged grief masquerading as rage. Whatever anger or rage you're facing in your life, take a moment to name it. Name your grief. Name it to tame it. Because when we call it what it is, anger loses its disguise. Healing begins. And forgiveness just might be possible. And the people said,